Have you ever imagined what it's like to be lost in the dark, in an unknown place, feeling fear take over with every step? I was only 6 years old when this happened to me. It wasn't an adventure. It was pure despair. My leg was bleeding, the noise of the forest around me and time passing slowly, as if no one would find me. I was there, alone, on an endless country road, trying to hold back my tears and asking for someone to show up, until out of nowhere, I saw eyes shining between the trees. They were German shepherds, big, strong, approaching me slowly. I didn't know if I should run or stay. I just remember the feeling of having no way out. But those dogs didn't advance. They didn't bark to scare me. They stayed around me, almost as if they were standing guard. Fear turned to doubt, and doubt soon turned to hope. But what those dogs did next changed everything. For you to understand how I got to this point, I need to go back to the beginning. The feeling of being 6 years old, lost and with an injured leg on a rural road in the interior of Colorado in the United States, is something that will never leave my memory. It was early October 2006, late afternoon, the sky already dark behind the mountains. My mother, Amanda, always told me not to leave the yard, but my curiosity to follow the sound of the creek behind the ranch got the better of me. But when I realized it, there was no sign of anyone else around. Blood was dripping down my shin, my shirt was torn, my sneakers were dirty with red dirt, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of branches swaying in the wind. All I wanted was my mother, but she seemed miles away. When I saw the dog's eyes reflected in the low grass, I thought I was in real danger. They were huge, with black and caramel fur and direct gaze, the kind that even adults respect. 5 of them in total, and the biggest of them, with a worn collar, was Duke. The others, Zeus, Rex, Juno, and Shadow, positioned themselves around me, without barking, just surrounding me as if they were on some kind of mission. I froze, barely breathing, feeling my hands sweating and my legs almost giving out. I thought I would be attacked right there. I remembered my grandfather's stories about farm dogs that don't accept strangers. Duke approached slowly, with a firm step. I couldn't look away. When he put his nose on my shoulder, my first reaction was to close my eyes, expecting the worst. But there was no bite or growl. He stood there, calm, looking into my eyes, and let out a long, almost human sigh. What had been fear turned into confusion. I felt like he was telling me to get up. Even though I was shaking, I took a deep breath and stood up slowly. The other dogs remained alert, as if they were escorting me. That's when I realized it wasn't danger. It was protection. Zeus and Rex walked a little further down the dirt path, kind of inviting me to follow. Juno and Shadow brought up the rear, never taking their eyes off the woods. With each step, the ground hurt from the cut, but I felt like I couldn't stop. Duke walked right next to me, almost touching me. I tried to ask where they were coming from, but all I got were attentive looks and an awkward silence. The kind of silence that seemed to have meaning. The strong smell of damp earth, grass, and fur was all I could smell. But along with it came this feeling that somehow I had a chance. When I tried to stop to rest, Duke pushed my arm with his snout, insisting that I keep going. Even though I was small, I understood. I wasn't there by chance, and neither were they. Night was falling fast, and every noise in the forest made everything more tense. Even so, with them by my side, it didn't seem so impossible to get out of there. I still didn't understand anything about what was really happening. I just realized that I was no longer helpless, and I didn't know it yet. But those dogs weren't there by chance. Now I want to know from you. In that situation, lost in the dark, surrounded by animals you had never seen before, would fear have spoken louder, or would you have trusted and moved forward? Write here in the comments what you would have done: run away, wait for help, or trust the instincts of those dogs. I want to see who would have had the courage to decide at the limit, and that was just the beginning of what was to come. Duke was the first to give the signal. He looked at me, then at the narrow path to the left, and walked off as if he knew exactly where to go. It wasn't long before Zeus and Rex took the lead. They picked their way through the branches, stopping every now and then to look around, sniff, and sometimes let out a low bark, just to remind me they were there. Juno and Shadow followed close behind, almost hot on my heels. It was like they'd been practicing this move their whole lives. At first, my fear was still greater than my confidence, But as we made our way through the maze of trees and rocks, I realized that I had no reason to doubt. I just had to keep up with them. Every now and then I would trip over a root, hear the rustling of dry leaves, but the dogs never let me fall behind. Duke always looked back, and if I stopped, he would come back, pushing my hand away or bumping my arm, as if to say, "Come on, don't give up now." My father always said that German Shepherds from the canine line are not like other dogs. They are trained to protect people, find lost people, and even help search for the injured in disasters. They are not instinctive attack dogs. They are taught to guard, to sniff, and to act only when they really need to. I remembered that I once saw a TV report about canine dogs on rescue missions. They use their sense of smell to track missing people, and they can smell people from miles away, even in the middle of the woods or snow. That stuck with me, and even at such a young age I began to understand that those dogs did not appear by chance. They were there because they knew what to do. The terrain was uneven, full of mud and small holes. Sometimes the trail disappeared among the rocks and tall grass. Zeus led the way, sniffing, and Rex followed close behind, always alert. Juno and Shadow made a point of walking around him, as if forming a shield. When he felt like sitting down and resting, he would see Duke standing there, just waiting. It seemed that as long as he was with them, nothing bad could happen. But it wasn't just about protecting myself from animals or the cold. There was a time when I heard the sound of water, a sign that we were close to the stream again. The dogs picked up their pace, and even though I was tired, I followed them. I could smell the wet earth, the sound of water running between the rocks. That gave me hope that the exit was close, or at least that the direction was right. But not everything was so simple. It was getting dark fast. The trees blocked most of the light, and every shadow seemed like a new danger. My stomach growled, my leg burned, and I started to think about what could be around the corner. That's when I heard a strange noise coming from the bushes on the right side of the trail. The dogs became alert in an instant. Zeus stopped, his fur standing on end. Rex took a step forward, growling softly. Juno and Shadow moved closer to me, forming a compact barrier, as if they knew something was about to happen. The silence lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My breath became shallow and I felt my hands sweating again. I looked at Duke, who stared at me and stood still, just waiting for my next move. The sound grew louder, and suddenly there was a howl, long and high-pitched, cutting through the silence of the forest. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't the sound of people. It chilled me to the bone. At that moment, I realized that my safety had a limit, and that the night was far from over. I stood there, unblinking, my palms sweating, when the howl came again, only closer. Zeus turned toward the sound, the hair on his neck standing on end. Duke growled softly, nudging my knee lightly as if telling me not to move. Rex and Juno took up positions on either side, while Shadow stood in the rear, facing away, watching for movement in the underbrush. The sound of my footsteps had faded. All I could hear was the dogs breathing and that strange howl that seemed to bounce from branch to branch. It wasn't until the brush shook, about 50 feet away, that I could see the animal. It wasn't a dog or a wolf. A skinny coyote with mud-stained fur appeared on the trail. He didn't look sick, just hungry. He looked straight at me, then at the dogs, assessing the situation. At that moment, my stomach turned. I knew, even as a child, that a frightened coyote can attack, especially if it thinks someone is invading its territory or threatening a food source. The dogs changed their stances immediately. Duke stepped forward, growling louder, his snout furrowed and his gaze fixed on the animal. Zeus stayed close behind, ears lowered, waiting for the next move. Rex and Juno cowered, ready for any reaction. The coyote took a few steps forward, sniffed the air, and bared his teeth. The dogs responded in sync. A loud bark, the kind that makes anyone back away, echoed along the trail. The coyote hesitated, backed away a little, but didn't leave. He began to walk in circles, trying to find an angle to approach. Shadow placed himself between me and the animal, barking and keeping the coyote ahead. The tension lasted for minutes that seemed like hours. I didn't know whether to scream, run, or stay still. I focused on the dog's gaze. They didn't tremble, they didn't back down. The coyote tried to charge again, but this time, Zeus took 2 steps forward, growling loudly. It was enough for the animal to understand that he wouldn't stand a chance there. He backed away, stopped at the edge of the woods, took one more look at me and the dogs, and disappeared into the bushes, vanishing as he had appeared. At that moment, my legs felt shaky, as if my body had decided to relax all at once. I ran my hand over my forehead, feeling the cold sweat. Duke came back, sniffed my hand, and gave me a little push to keep walking. I didn't say anything. I could only look at each of them and think, these dogs had just truly saved me. They didn't even know me. They didn't know anything about me, but they risked everything to protect me. And then comes the question that still makes me think, could you trust animals you've never seen in your life? In the middle of the woods with a coyote threatening to attack? What would you do if you were there, with 6 canine dogs forming a shield around you? Right here in the comments. I want to know what your decision would be, but don't think the threat was over. That night still held many surprises. I thought the worst was over, but I was completely wrong. The relief of seeing the coyote go was short-lived, because when I looked around again, I realized that the sky had gone completely dark. The dog's flashlight, their solid presence, was all I had to keep going. Duke led the way again, leading me along what looked like an old hunting trail, full of twigs and leaves that stuck to my wet pants. With every step, I looked back and saw the others in formation. They never left me alone for a second. Suddenly, their barking changed. It was no longer that threatening tone, but something sharper, more insistent, almost as if they were warning someone. My heart was already tired from so much fright, but this time, the noise was different. From somewhere to the right, I heard a familiar voice shouting my name. "Lucas! Lucas!" It was my mother, Amanda. The sound was shaky, almost without strength, but it was her. I tried to answer, but my throat failed me. I could only stammer, and the dogs themselves saved me. They ran in the direction of the scream, barking loudly, calling the attention of whoever was nearby. Within seconds, my mother's figure appeared between the trees, running, clumsy, out of breath. Her hair was all disheveled, her t-shirt was covered in mud, and her face was completely different from the one I knew, full of despair, with bulging eyes. When she saw me, she collapsed. She dropped everything she had in her hands and hugged me so tightly that I thought I was going to fall apart. The feeling of relief mixed with the pain of everything I had been through exploded all at once. Amanda was crying so much that she seemed unable to breathe properly, saying my name over and over, as if she was telling herself that this was real. I cried along with her, a bit stiff, unable to explain anything properly. The dogs stood there, all around us, watching everything. It took Amanda a few minutes to realize that they were standing still, waiting, looking at her as if to ask, "Is everything okay now?" She stepped back a little, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and asked, frightened, "Son, how did you manage to get back here? Are you hurt? What happened?" I spoke in a rush, sobbing, but I managed to explain that I had gotten lost on the road, fallen, hurt my leg, and that those dogs had found me. I told her that they protected me, didn't let anything get near me, and that they had even scared away a strange animal. She looked at each of them, trying to understand what was happening. Amanda had never seen anything like it. The dogs didn't leave right away. They seemed to want to make sure everything was okay, as if they didn't trust the adults 100% to take care of me. Zeus stared into my mother's eyes for a few seconds, as if he was introducing himself. Rex came closer and put his nose in my hand. Only when Amanda stood up with me in her arms, and I assured her that I was really okay, did they turn around and start walking slowly down the road. We stopped for a minute, watching them walk away in silence, until they disappeared around the bend, as if they had accomplished a mission and were going back to their own world. I hugged my mother once more, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Deep down, I knew that this story wasn't over. Not just for me, but for the dogs themselves. It was impossible to leave that road that night and pretend that nothing had changed. I looked back one last time and whispered, "They saved me, Mom." Those dogs didn't just show up. The relief of being with her was real, but the story of those animals was just beginning, and I needed to find out why. My mother had never been one to believe in coincidences, so when the dogs began to walk slowly down the road and look back, as if they wanted us to come with them, she didn't hesitate. She put me in the back seat of the car, started the engine, but instead of driving home, she kept the headlights low and followed the dogs. The silence between us was eerie, broken only by the crunch of the wheels on the gravel and the occasional distant barking. I could feel the bandage pressing against the wound on my leg, but at that moment, the pain didn't even matter. All I wanted to do was figure out who these animals were and why they seemed so sure of where they were going. The Georgia country road seemed even more deserted that night. We drove straight for about 10 minutes, then turned onto a dirt trail, with trees blocking the way and brush brushing the sides of the car. The dogs were always together, Duke and Zeus in the lead, the others behind, all attentive, as if they were leading a group on a mission. Time seemed to slow down. My mother tried to talk to me, but all I could do was stare out at their silhouettes in the headlights. When the trail ended, we stopped at a rusty iron gate. A crooked sign, covered in leaves, had worn letters that still read, K9 Unit, County Police Department. The gate was wide open, as if no one had been there for a long time. The dogs went in first, walking straight into an open yard full of dry leaves and gravel. On the other side was a low, dark brick building with broken windows and a door hanging off to one side. My mother turned off the car, hesitated for a second, but I was already out of the seat, limping, pulling her by the hand. Curiosity got the better of me than fear. The silence there was different. It seemed like time had stopped. The dogs walked to a block of kennels, all lined up, the gates open, but each one with a small metal name tag attached to the front. Duke, Zeus, Shadow, Rex, Juno, Max. The ink was already faded, but it was still readable. I stopped in front of Duke's kennel and put my hand on the gate. He looked back at me, as if he had been waiting for it. My mother stood there looking at each name, trying to understand what it all meant. That was when it hit me. Those dogs weren't strays, nor had they been lost by accident. They had an owner, they had a job, they had undergone intensive training, they had probably saved lives, found missing people, maybe even arrested criminals. And now they were there, abandoned, surviving together in that forgotten place, guarding an empty building that no one wanted to know about anymore. Amanda ran her hand over the signs, wiping away the dirt, while muttering, "How can anyone forget animals like that? They were from the police, Lucas." In the midst of that heavy silence, all the dogs came closer. One by one, they sat in their kennels, as if they had been trained to do so. My chest tightened. It didn't seem fair. I ran my hand through Duke's fur, feeling him relax slightly. My mother crouched down next to Zeus and stared at him. For a moment, no one said anything. The feeling was one of sadness, but also of respect. It was as if they were waiting for someone who never came. At that moment, I understood that I hadn't just been saved by them. I was seeing the result of years of waiting, loyalty, and abandonment. Working dogs like those, German shepherds, are trained to live as a team with a police officer. They learn to follow commands, find missing people, and sniff out clues that no human can. But there, in that kennel, all that was left was silence and each other's company. My mother and I sat on the cold floor, surrounded by those dogs, and the question immediately came to mind. Would they stay there forever, forgotten? It was impossible to accept that without trying to do something. But what happened next broke my heart in a way that I will never forget. My mother was silent, slowly running her hand over the kennel signs, trying to make sense of the whole story. When I heard a car approaching on the dirt road, it was unusual to see headlights there, in the middle of that forgotten place. The dogs all stood up at once, alert, but without any sign of aggression. It was as if they knew exactly who was coming. The car stopped on the other side of the gate, the lights went out, and a man in his early 50s got out. Gray hair, a tired expression, the look of someone who had seen more than he wanted to. He was holding a flashlight and a keychain hanging from his belt. The man walked through the gate slowly, stopped in the courtyard and looked around, with a mixture of astonishment and relief. The moment he said, "Duke?" the dogs reacted in a way I had never seen before. Duke walked ahead, shaking his butt in a way he had never done with me or my mother. Zeus, Shadow, and the others gathered, forming a semicircle around the man. There was not a hint of distrust, just that happiness that was hard to explain, as if they had found a family member after years. The man knelt down, opened his arms, and was surrounded by the 6 dogs, all trying to get close at the same time, sniffing, licking his face, jumping with an enthusiasm that only those who have been truly loved can understand. I had never seen my mother so emotional. Her mouth fell open, unsure whether to cry or smile. The man looked at us, wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, and walked toward us. "My name is Robert," he said, his voice shaking a little. "I trained these dogs. I thought I would never see them again." I stared at Duke, who was standing next to him like he had turned back into a puppy. Robert knelt down again, looked Zeus in the eye and said softly, "I'm sorry, buddy. I tried to—" My mother asked what had happened, why the dogs were there like that. He took a deep breath, and for the first time he looked older than any adult I had ever seen. Robert said that years ago, when the county police department closed the K9 unit, they promised that all the dogs would be relocated to other teams or families. He was in charge of turning the animals over to state officials, but last week he learned that some of the dogs had gone nowhere. No records, no new families. No one knew where they had gone. He searched for months, returning to the location several times, but only found the building locked and empty. Eventually he stopped trying, because they said that maybe the dogs had been taken by non-profits, or that someone in the area had adopted them. He never got over it, but he couldn't keep looking anymore. Robert looked at each of the dogs, calling them by name: Duke, Zeus, Shadow, Rex, Juno, Max, and each one reacted as if they had just found their best friend again. He said that no animal should be treated like this, and that they had given everything for the city, protecting people, saving lives, risking themselves in situations that few humans would dare. "Leaving these dogs here was the hardest thing I've ever been asked to do," he said, his voice cracking. "I never wanted to abandon you." The scene there seemed impossible to be invented. The dogs surrounded Robert, without fighting, just wanting affection and attention, almost as if they wanted to make sure he was real. Duke lay down with his head resting on his foot. Zeus rested his nose on Robert's hand and remained still, waiting for a pet. My mother pulled me aside and whispered that she had never seen animals with such a level of loyalty. It was clear that, even after so much time, the bond between them remained intact. For a few minutes, no one said anything. It was just the sound of the dogs breathing and the sound of Robert murmuring thanks. And now, after all this, there is a question that affects everyone. Have you ever been forced to abandon someone or something you loved? Write in the comments below what this changed in you. I want to know, because seeing the pain and joy of this reunion was a lesson I will never forget. But that night still held more surprises, and I had no idea what was to come. The mood was heavy, but there was also something different, a sense of relief mixed with hope. When Robert stood up, still with his hands in Duke and Zeus's fur, he looked at me and my mother, as if he needed permission to do what he already knew was right. He explained that he had a farm a little over an hour away, a large fenced-in place with plenty of room, and that he had always dreamed of filling the house with animals, but he had never been able to get the dogs out of his head since the unit closed. Now, faced with them, he didn't think twice. Robert began to talk to the dogs, and it was funny to see how they responded to his tone of voice, sitting, wagging their tails, and seeming to understand every command. He opened the side gate of the car, took some old collars he had left in the trunk, and called them one by one. None of the dogs hesitated, not even for a second. First Duke came in, then Zeus, Shadow, Rex, Max, and lastly Juno. They seemed to know they were going home, as if all the fear of years had suddenly disappeared. My mother couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged Robert, thanked him, and said she couldn't imagine anyone better suited to take care of them. All I could think about was everything that had happened in such a short time. The deserted road, the scare with the coyote, the feeling of being lost, and now seeing those dogs finally getting into a car to go home for real. Before closing the door, Robert turned to me and asked if I wanted to go with him to the farm. I didn't even think about it at the time. I said yes. My mother agreed, and we followed the car, with the dogs in the back seat, all of us looking out the window as if we had been waiting for this forever. The road to the farm was winding and surrounded by tall trees. Night had fallen, and the only sound was the roar of the engine and the occasional anxious barking from behind. When we arrived, it wasn't just a house, it was a real farm, with a huge barn, several sheds, an open field, and even a small lake off to the side. Robert opened the gate, parked the car in front of the main house, let each of the dogs out, and watched as they ran around the grounds. It was like watching a group of children enter a park for the first time. They sniffed each other, ran, jumped, trying to get each other to play. My mother smiled and said she never imagined she would witness a scene like that, after everything she had been through. Robert, standing in the middle of the lawn, looked at me and said, "These dogs have always been my family. Now they have a real home, and you are part of that too." I felt a strange pride, as if I had helped close a cycle much bigger than me. It wasn't just about me, or about that night, but about all those years they had waited, never giving up. At that moment, I understood that family is not just about those who are born together, but also about those who stay together, even after abandonment, distance, and oblivion. The dogs showed more loyalty and love than many people. They ran through the fields until they were tired, lay down on the porch of the house, and for the first time since the beginning of the night, it seemed like everything was where it should be. But one thing kept running through my mind. I needed to see how they would react in the coming days. What would their first morning in that place be like? What would they do now, free and protected, after so long? I wasn't ready to leave without witnessing the first night of their new life, and that's when everything really changed. Seeing those dogs running free on Robert's farm was one of the most memorable scenes of my life. They no longer looked like the survivors abandoned in the old kennel, nor the silent protectors of that dark road. There, scattered across the field, they were just real dogs, with room to run, to play, and, finally, to rest without fear. Duke took the lead, crossing a patch of tall grass to the farm fence, as if he were mapping every inch of that new territory. Zeus stayed close to the lake, sniffing the water, and then throwing himself in with everything, kicking up mud and making the others run after him. Even Shadow, who was the quietest of the group, forgot his rigid posture and started circling an old tennis ball he found near the shed. I sat on the porch with Robert, and Amanda joined me shortly after, her eyes still red from crying. He opened a bottle of lemonade, offered me a glass, and stared at the dogs as if he were watching a miracle happen right in front of him. In the silence, I could feel everyone's happiness there, but most of all, a kind of peace I hadn't felt since the beginning of that day. Each of the dogs explored the land in their own way. Max jumped over the garden fence just to lie down in the freshly turned earth. Juno found a pile of twigs and played with them, trying to convince the others to join in the game. When the sky began to lighten, after all that running around, they all ended up lying down under a tree, with their tongues hanging out, and their eyes half closed from sleep. Robert laughed and said it was the first time he had seen them all like that, totally relaxed. I watched that scene and thought about everything that had happened in the last few hours. The fear, the feeling of being lost, the relief of having been found, their reunion with their old trainer, and now that freedom that overflowed in the way each puppy behaved. And it was impossible not to think about what home is, what real family is. I grew up hearing that family was those who shared the same roof, who had the same last name or the same blood. But that day, seeing those dogs finally at peace, I understood that family can be those who find you when you are lost, who protect you even without knowing you, who stay by your side in the most difficult moments and celebrate when everything ends well. They had been family to each other, even after being abandoned. And now, with Robert, with us, they had found again what it truly means to belong somewhere. When Amanda hugged me, thanking me for everything, it wasn't just because she found me safe and sound, but because she also knew she was witnessing something rare, the rebuilding of trust, joy, and hope, both for me and for those dogs. I never again doubted that home is much more than four walls. It's where we are accepted, remembered, and protected. I looked at Robert, who was still there with tears in his eyes, and said from the bottom of my heart, "They're home." Deep down, I think that was what everyone there needed. The certainty that, after so much fear and abandonment, it was possible to start over. Family is what stays, even after the worst. And there, in the middle of that farm, we saw that even those who have been forgotten can find once again a place to call home. Time passed, and everything changed, but there are things that never leave our memories. A few years after that day, I returned to Robert's farm as a teenager, along with Amanda. The dogs were different. Their fur was brighter, their eyes were calm, and the scars from the past were almost invisible. Duke was no longer the suspicious leader. He was all joy, chasing chickens. Zeus liked to sleep in the sun, without worrying about any noise. Shadow, who at first didn't trust anyone, now sought affection all the time. The farm became the home they always deserved, and each visit was a living reminder of how loyalty and hope can make the impossible real. The scene was always the same. Robert sitting on the old wooden bench, throwing food on the floor just to watch the dogs mess. Amanda and I would spend the afternoon there unhurriedly, just watching the happiness of those animals. Everyone who came here felt that this was not just a place, it was a true home. No matter how much time had passed, the connection was immediate, and no one ever forgot what they did for me, or how much they insisted on surviving together even after everything. This story shows that abandonment does not destroy the hope of those who believe in reunion. Loyalty has no expiration date. When someone or even an animal waits for years without losing the desire to belong, it is because they know the value of a true family. Home is where there is space to start over, no matter how many times we have been left behind. In the end, dogs taught me more about courage and love than anyone else at that time. They saved me, but they also saved each other. Now I want to hear from you. Would you give a home to someone who was forgotten, even knowing all the scars that would come with it? Right here in the comments. I want to see who would have that courage. And more, who have you rescued from loneliness? Tell us about your experience, because this space here is for stories that transform lives. I know this story touched you, because it's not just about dogs, a lost boy, or unlikely reunions. It's about the strongest instinct there is, to survive, to trust again, and to create bonds that change everything. You're already part of this story just by being here. Subscribe to continue following stories that challenge everything we think we know about friendship, family, and survival. Leave your like. That's how these stories reach more people who need to believe in a new beginning. Now don't waste any time. What happened here was unbelievable. But what you're about to see challenges everything we think we know about the impossible. The next video is now live. Watch it now and prepare to question everything about what friendship truly is and what survival is.